Good morning, Muskegon. Hi, I'm Jody Klock. And this morning we're here to talk about something called funeral school. So while that topic may be a little scary to some, it's interesting to others. If you've never had to walk that journey, you might find this enlightening. So if you could sit back and take maybe 10-15 minutes of your time, hopefully we'll have an interesting dialogue. Over the next few minutes, like I said, we were going to talk about that dreaded word called funeral, or sometimes I refer to that F word, and I'm not talking fun. But our whole purpose is to take that spook factor out of it. So with all kidding aside, there's a lot of things I'd like to clear up. And these are really the top 10 myths that people share with us when they think about coming into a funeral home. I'm going to start at the bottom. The first one is, I have a will and it's all taken care of in my will. Well, that simply couldn't be further from the truth. The will is certainly an essential part of funeral planning and estate planning, but people look at the will after the funeral. With a prepaid funeral, it's all taken care of. Not quite. It is all taken care of to the point that you've expressed your wishes and the funds are taken care of, but there are some other things that family members need to come in and contribute just to make sure what was a temporary document now becomes a legal document, and that is archived and preserved for years to come. My cremated remains, they must be buried. Heck no, there are no rules in funeral service anymore. People can be cremated and they can be scattered. I don't want to know about it, but I'm sure there's a lot of people hanging out on people's shelves or in the closet, maybe even on a bookshelf somewhere. But no, cremated remains do not have to be buried. Ashes, those are what's left from the cremation process. Well, thanks for the movie Meeting the Fockers. Some people do think they are ashes, but no, those are fragmented bones that have been pulverized, and the proper term for that is cremains. Vaults and grave liners protect the casket. That's an oldie but a goodie. The only reason that someone would be buried, and in the cemetery they say you need a vault or a grave liner, is not to protect the casket. It is to protect the ground. Lots of times as a kid, I'm sure that you've gone through that cemetery on a bike ride and you've seen the ground all lumpy and up and down. That's because the ground settled differently and it made it not flat. So there was not a lot of support. Protective caskets help preserve the body. Not so. Protective caskets simply mean that it's airtight and that it's sealed. If a body is embalmed, regardless of, be it 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, at some point in time, that body will start to deteriorate. So protective just means airtight. It's necessary to view the body. This is a big topic even as a funeral home owner, a ranger, director, people across the country are having. No, you do not have to view the body. The reason that the funeral directors and a lot of people are requiring that is to make sure that there's a positive identification. So if death occurred and the next of kin was not present when that removal was made, you just want to make sure that you have the right person. And as silly as that sounds, that can and has happened. An embalmed body will make a better memory picture. Well, I'd like to know who came up with that one. No, it doesn't. An embalmed body, what that simply does is bring the body back to life, if you will. Many times you'll see a healthy person and then over the last 90 days of their life they deteriorate. And so where they were a healthy 140 pounds, they might have died at around 82, 83 pounds. That just fills them back out so they look like the person that they were and how you remember them. Burial. Embalming is required by law. No. That is a self-imposed industry standard. When I say industry, what that means is that funeral homes across the country believe and actively support that if you are going to have a public visitation and that visitation is going to happen in more than 24 hours, it's probably best for sanitary and health reasons to have that body embalmed. But is it necessary? No. Is it a better thing? Is it a healthier thing? Is it a sanitary thing? Probably so. Last but not least, our number one myth is that you have to follow societal norms. Well, if I knew what those societal norms were, I would say you had to follow them, but this is 2010, soon to be 2011, and there are no rules. The rules are you have to have a funeral home involved to take care of some of the necessary items. Outside of that, you can celebrate your loved one's memory any way you'd like. So listen to your internal compass and don't let anybody talk you into something that you're not comfortable with. However, my personal favorite myth is this: I'm going to let my family take care of it because they know what I want. Well, I don't know how many families I've sat with over time, and they knew what mom and dad wanted, or they all agreed upon it, or they had the money to take care of it. So do your family a favor. Put that out on the table. You're certainly not jinxing yourself. Just get that topic out there and move it on. They really need a roadmap. Once they have a roadmap, they'll feel good about their journey. There are 5 parts to planning a funeral. The first part is probably the most important part. The other 4 are the financial pieces. The first part is called the information gathering. The information gathering is when you sit down and you get the things that are unique and specific to the deceased. Sometimes I affectionately say your name, rank, and serial number, but all kidding aside, I mean the proper spelling of your first name, your social security number, your date of birth, your parents' and grandparents' legal names. We might know all of their names that we call him Uncle Joe, but what was really Uncle Joe's real name? Or was Joe his real name? It would have been Joseph. It could have been Gene, but he happened to go by Joe. And those things happen all the time. So the information gathering is what determines the flow of the whole service itself and also the legal documents that will be generated. The second thing that people have to talk about is, I call it the disposition preference. In simple terms, that just means, are we going to be buried or are we going to be cremated? That's the second decision that happens, because once you make that decision, then the rest of the decisions and your roadmap falls in place. And these are the factors that determine a burial or a cremation. The first one is, how are you going to pay for it? If you don't have any money and you're unlimited funds, first of all, don't be ashamed to say that, because you're in good company. The rest of the world is right there, especially in this crazy economic times that we're having right now. So I might want a Cadillac, but I can only afford a Ford. That's not wrong, that's reality. So be honest and then just keep moving forward. When death occurred. If death occurred on a Sunday, and let's just say the senior was living alone and nobody discovered this until a Monday or a Tuesday, then there might be some factors involved that you might want to rethink your original intentions. What was the cause of death? Maybe someone drowned. Maybe there was an auto accident. Whatever the cause of death will be, could also be a determining factor on, do you want the body viewed and do you want the body present? That doesn't mean they can't be, but you might want to take that into consideration. Where did death happen? If death happened overseas, it might be more cost effective to have that body cremated and shipped back versus to have the whole body shipped back to have a traditional funeral, if you will. What religion? Religion plays a big thing in everything, and each religion has their own specific rituals. You get into the Jewish faith, they have things have to happen in a very short order of time, and certain members of the church or elders of the church have to take care of things. You get into the Buddhist religion, there are all kinds of different things that have to take place. So you're going to have to think about, is that ritual important, and can we honor that with how death occurred? Okay, what did mom have? A lot of times people want to have for their father or their mother what their spouse had. Okay, but understand you don't have to, but that's something to take into consideration. And then it all gets down to your lifestyle and your family preferences. Children live all over the United States, so no longer does everyone live in one central location. You may have to take into consideration somebody will be coming from California, while the other person might be coming from Texas. Funerals are not made to be convenient, just like having the birth of a baby isn't made to be convenient, but sometimes you can control some factors. So if you opt to have a cremation, you can plan a little further out when a memorial service is. That is a little more palliative in someone's world to make that happen. I want to break this down even further. When you have a burial, these are all the things that have to happen in a very acute period of time. First off, are you going to have the service at the funeral or at the church or at a community center? But where is that ultimately going to take place? Are you going to have the merchandise? Remember we talked about caskets. All right, you've got to check on your caskets. Do you want a protective casket, a non-protective casket? All these things your funeral director or arranger will educate you on. And then there's the cash advance items. Cash advance items are the things like your cemetery or burial plots, opening and closing of the grave, the obituaries in the newspaper. All of those things add up and they go above and beyond the cost of a funeral. Once you've made those decisions, now you have to think about visitation. Are you going to gather and tell those stories the same day, the evening before, 2 days before? And then when they have that visitation, is that casket going to be opened or closed? And then is that body going to be embalmed? Those are all the things that go in to something as simple as saying, I'd like a visitation. And then your other option with burial is to have an immediate burial. And an immediate burial simply means we're going to do everything at the graveside. So we're just going to have a few prayers, do something simple. We're going to honor our loved one, and then we're going to end it right at the grave. If you look in I want to say the Tri-City area around here between Grand Haven and Ferrysburg, and then Muskegon County in that little area, this is the average cost, the $15,245 of an average funeral. Okay, when I say the average funeral, I mean from the time the death occurs until the time you walk away from the grave. Notice that the cost of the funeral home is under $10,000. Okay, on top of that are the cash advance items, and then obviously the monuments and markers. So that can be very costly. Those are all very personal decisions, and there are no wrongs or rights. Cremation. Cremation has an immediate service, which just means no nothing. It means that when that person dies, we're simply going to do a cremation. We're not going to view, we're not going to have a celebration. Whatever that family's going to do, they're going to do it later, and they don't want any funeral home involvement. If you choose to have the funeral home involvement, you can have a memorial service. Again, much like when we call it an at-need or a traditional funeral burial, you can have it in the funeral home, at the church, at a community center, and today many folks are having them at the country club, the Vikings, the yacht club, anything that they go and gather and tell stories. The last thing is kind of a hybrid, and there's a lot of that happening today. And that means where the body is physically there at the visitation, and the body is in a casket. And people view it just like you would the traditional. The only thing that is different is at the end of the day, we don't end up at the cemetery. Everything is left at the church and or at the funeral home, and then the body goes to be cremated, and then the cremains are returned to the family. So it looks like and it feels like a traditional service. However, you don't have the cash advance costs at the end that incur at the cemetery. Absolutely everything right here is what goes into making a funeral. So when you say funerals are expensive or they're overpriced, I encourage you just to take a breath and sit back and say, what's all involved? Because from the time that the phone rings till the time that the phone ends and you walk away, somebody has to guide you through making these decisions, and they have to make it affordable for you. So not only can you afford to honor your loved one, that you don't go broke in the process, because that is not the intent. The intent is to honor your loved one and then also host a gathering for friends and family so they can come and share the stories and help keep their memory alive. But real quickly, I just want to go right through this pyramid. And these are the decisions that have to come. Do I want the body there for viewing? Yes or no? If I do want the body viewing, is it going to be embalmed? Yes or no? Where am I going to have this? Church? Funeral home? Someplace else? What is that physical location? Once I've got that physical location, am I going to do that the same day, 2 days, 3 days? What works for me? What works for those who are going to come join us? Am I going to do it morning, afternoon, or both? What type of merchandise is going to be involved? Will a casket need to be present? If so, how are we going to get that there? Is that something that the funeral home is going to be involved with? Once you make your merchandise decisions, you have to think about the cash advance items. If you remember, you decided to do a traditional service with the burial and the casket, that means where's that casket going to what cemetery? Did I purchase a plot? I have to pay for the opening and closing. What about the monument or marker? All right, what about the obituaries? What newspapers do they go in? How about flowers? What about a reception afterwards? All of that goes into that, in that component. And then last but not least, if that person was cremated, after we've done everything else, where are the cremated remains going to be? Are we going to take them home? Are we going to share those with our brothers and sisters? There are scattering urns that you could do so you could actually set those cremains out in Lake Michigan, and eventually they'll sink to the bottom and they'll spread. Or I mentioned the brothers and sisters. Do we have companion urns where everybody gets a little piece? Do we want jewelry? Do we want a thumbprint? Those are all the things that you have to think about. And then on top of that, you have to worry about your own family, how to grieve, what works, getting everyone together, and that can be very overwhelming. And last but not least is, how are you going to pay for that? Maybe you weren't planning on a death happening in the near future and you were caught in an accident and by surprise. Hopefully there was life insurance, but if there isn't life insurance, are you liquid? Do you have enough cash where you can pay for that? Can you put it on a credit card? Do you have to work with your friends and family? Those are all the things that happen in the decision-making process for a funeral. If you prepaid that funeral, that means when death happens, it's all taken care of outside of any, as we just learned about, cash advance items, because those can't be guaranteed. The other things that you need to think about when death happens, if you had not prepaid it, is if death happens, let's just say in an accident when you weren't planning for it, does your family have the necessary life insurance to cover that? Do you have enough cash in the bank to pay for that? Can your family write a check? And or do you really have to look to your friends and your loved ones to help pitch in and pay for that? So those are all the parts to planning a funeral. So the next time someone tells you that funerals are very expensive, I'm going to agree with you and I'm going to say they are. However, if you compare it to an event planner or a wedding planner, you have weeks, if not months, to make those decisions. And you might spend the same, if not more. The average wedding today is over $10,000, and sometimes that's a second and a third wedding. The average funeral, depending on cremation and or burial, let's just go cremation with an average of between 2 and 6, and the funeral aspect, funeral home only portion, was a little over 9. By the time you had all the accoutrements, that was a little over 15. But the funeral home makes that happen in 24 to 48 hours or less. And that takes time. And I say those people are making it all happen in a short period of time to make your experience on a bad day a little better.